everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing a book review on The Lowland by Jhumpa Lahiri. This is Lahiri's second novel, but fourth book that has been published. She has published The Interpreter of Maladies, which was her first collection of short stories that also won her the Pulitzer Prize. Then she published The Namesake, which was her first novel, and then Unaccustomed Earth, which was also a collection of short stories, and this is her second novel. Now I'm going to start off by saying I'm probably going to completely butcher all of the names in this story, so apologies for that in advance. This book starts off by following Subhash and Udayan, who are two brothers who are about a year and a half apart from each other in age, and so they were basically just, best friends growing up. They did everything together, and then they grow up and go to college, and they end up going to different colleges, but they both still live at home. Udayan ends up becoming a part of the Naxalite movement in Calcutta. That sort of shapes the way that he lives his life from that point forward. Subhash doesn't really take as much of a part in the movement. He just kind of knows little bits and pieces of it based on what he learns from his brother and some things that he hears, but he isn't really a part of the movement himself, and then eventually he ends up moving to America, and you just end up following the lives of these two brothers and their family over the course of about 50 years. I won't say very much more than that because I think some of the events that transpire over the course of this book are quite surprising, or at least they were surprising to me as someone who didn't really know much more than that. This is a book that I have been highly anticipating since early this year, late last year, when I first heard that Jhumpa Lahiri was going to be writing another book. She is one of my favorite authors. She was probably one of the first Indian authors that I ever read, and she was definitely one of the first Indian authors that I read who wrote about the Indian experience in America. A lot of other Indian authors just talk about India itself and not America, and so the way that she writes, I relate to a lot of the things that she talks about. And when I was reading The Namesake, it was sort of the first time I was seeing that aspect of myself reflected in a book, which is something that's always very exciting when you don't see yourself reflected very often in books. So that being said, I had very high expectations going into this book, and part of me also knew that this book could never really live up to the expectations that I had. So I think that conflict sort of influenced the way I read this book. I will say I really enjoyed this book. Is it my favorite by her? No. And if you haven't read any of her books before, I wouldn't recommend that this be your first. I would recommend going with The Namesake or either collection of short stories. This book is very beautifully written. Her writing is known for being quite lyrical. She describes everything beautifully. You can really imagine and see the things that she is talking about. But I will say I wasn't super excited about the character development or the lack thereof happening in this story. But I will say that this is a story that isn't really super action packed. Obviously there are things that happen, but this isn't really a plot driven novel. It is very much one of those books where you are just following people over the course of their lifetime and just seeing what happens to them. There are a lot of just little minor things that bothered me, especially with some of the characters. This book also tells a story from various perspectives, so you're going through time and you're seeing the lives of all of these different characters. It's all told in third person, but you're sometimes watching life happen to Subhash, and sometimes you're seeing it happen to his parents, and sometimes you're seeing it from Udayan and all these different characters. You're never really sticking to one character. I never really tend to love that writing style, so I think that is also just something that hindered me from completely loving this book. In the end, I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I feel like reading Jhumpa Lahiri is still worth it. I would never say to skip any of the books, and I definitely don't think you should skip this one. But again, if you haven't read any of her books before, I wouldn't recommend starting with this one. If you have read her other stuff and you loved it, I think you will like this one, but I don't know if you would necessarily love it. I know there are a lot of people who really did love this book, but I think personally it wasn't the best. But of course, that is just my opinion. This book has been up for the National Book Award and the Man Booker Prize and things like that, so obviously there are a lot of people who really love it, and it has very high critical acclaim. So yeah, that is my review of The Lowland. If you have any questions about this book or any of Jhumpa Lahiri's other books, definitely feel free to leave those comments down below, or if you have read this book, feel free to let me know what you guys thought of it. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.